and welcome to another episode of the Serie A Chronicles podcast. It's only the three of us today, and by three of us, I mean Nicky Bandini and I mean Rizuki, and of course our producer Simon, who's going to try really hard not to do any facial expressions to throw me off my game.
I think this is Sarah Chronicles Classic. You know how like Coke had like Coke and Coke Classic for a while? It's Sarah Chronicles Classic.
Like a retro throwback.
Yeah, it's a throwback episode.
for the nostalgic among us, but Patrick Kendrick has decided to already go on international break, and I can't say I blame him for it. So hopefully he's resting and having a nice cup of tea down in Napoli. We're going to kick off the show by explaining that this Atletico Madrid side, which I want to punch in the face at the moment, okay, that have raved about this home form of theirs, like one loss all season at home, this like monumental, like fantastic team when it comes to the Metropolitano. By the way, I kept calling it Wanda Metropolitano. It's no longer sponsored by Wanda, but you know what I mean.
As well. It sounds right now, doesn't it?
It just does, yeah. Anyway, at the Metropolitano, and guess what happened today, guys? They got smashed, humiliated 3-0 by a Barcelona side that doesn't even have a full midfield, okay? Make matters worse, then they had Molina sent off in the 90th minute. I mean, they were just totally thrashed. Oh, Nicky, we obviously watched the Champions League match. Inter, unfortunately, couldn't get over the line. There were huge existential conversations that happened afterwards about the quality of Italian football. Inter themselves have only managed a 1-1 draw against Napoli this evening. Now, I did a stupid thing and I bet on them to win because I thought that they would show us this wonderful like mentality that they've showed us all season, in the sense that, you know what, we're going to put this aside and concentrate on getting this win, especially because I just looked at Napoli and I thought, no, Osimhen, right, it's going to be easy. But no, they drew, and after 10 consecutive wins, Napoli drew Inter drew to Napoli. So something's happened. I don't know whether
it's like almost like amazing like mirror situation that was set up. It's kind of an amazing coincidence of the schedule that you had the two Spanish clubs that knocked out the two Italian clubs played each other, right? Because Barcelona also knocked out Napoli.
Yes.
So we went from midweek, these two Italian clubs losing to those two Spanish clubs, and then they played each other. And I mean, I don't know, maybe we should get to this as well afterwards. Maybe like this reevaluates Napoli's performance, because Napoli, yes, the scoreline said 3-1, but actually at 2-1, they were very in that game against Barcelona, who apparently are miles better than Atletico. But are
they miles better? I mean, I don't know what's going on in Spanish. It's a very weird league right now this season. I cannot really define it.
Is for someone else. I'm just reacting to that scoreline, honestly.
The big question is what we think of Italian football.
Yeah, so right after Inter went out, it's one of those moments where you almost wish we could share the Sarah Chronicles group chat with our listeners, because there was like proper there was strong emotions coming out, which is, I suppose it should be, because I mean, I was going to say we're all Italian. We're not all like by blood Italian, but I think we're all Italian by spirit and by our interests. So we're all Italian in the way we think about football. We're all passionate about it. And I think there was the range of reactions from probably, I would say, at the most negative end of it. I hope you won't be mad at me for saying, I think producer Simon was very like, this is all awful. They weren't as good as we thought they were. And I was probably at the far end of it, where I was coming in and saying, listen, I'm not going to reevaluate what I think about Inter and what I've watched in football all season on the basis of one night. It's incredibly disappointing that Inter played like that against Atletico, and I think it was one of their absolute worst performances the whole season, being blunt about it. And I think
think that bad?
I think in the second half, I think I've not seen them look that afraid on a football pitch in a really, really long time. And as soon as that equaliser went in on the night, I was saying, I don't think they're going to get through this. And I was messaging various people, I had my brother sat next to me actually, and because it was my mum's birthday that evening, so we had a birthday dinner and then went to watch. And I said that they're going out. And I said it long before that second goal went in for Atletico, because they were doing something I haven't seen them do in a really, really long time, which is retreat. They were doing something that they didn't do at the start of the game. At the start of the game, I thought it was actually quite a sort of messy, open game. And not necessarily that Di Marco's goal was with the run of play, but it certainly was at a point in the game where both teams were trying to go forward. That late bit of the game, when you're seeing Inzaghi look to his bench and just bring on another centre-back, take off his attacking wing-backs. You've taken off Dumfries, you've taken Di Marco. That's not who Inter are. I know they've had all these clean sheets. I know we talk about their defending, but they have been a front-footed team. And I felt, watching it, like they were a team that just lost their nerve. Now, we can go to individual bits on top of that. Obviously, Marcus Thuram has a great chance to score and he fluffs it. Barella also has a chance to score and he fluffs it. I know everyone's going to absolutely pummel Lautaro, and I've pummeled Lautaro a bit, frankly, for how awful that penalty was. And I think it's completely like, it's a conversation I had on the Continent podcast. So without wanting to just repeat myself, the problem that I think I feel with Lautaro is, it's not that he's a bad player. It's because I think he's a genuinely brilliant player. And I think even within this game, you can look at those two chances I just mentioned, Thuram and Barella, and say, look, he assisted both of those, right? He was still doing good things in this game. But I think when you're talking about strikers, when you're talking about centre-forwards, there are some centre-forwards, when the big game is on the line, who are demanding the football and they want it for themselves. I almost feel like Lautaro doesn't want the ball for himself when that game is on the line. And that's why he's setting other people up instead of trying to score himself. And that's why he's taking the fifth penalty, because he might get away with not even taking that penalty at number 5. I think that's what is disappointing about Lautaro on that occasion, is
Wait, Nicky,
feeling
hold
like,
up.
why aren't you the guy taking this on yourself and insisting it's me?
Nicky, when is it during that game that you said that, is it as soon as the equaliser went in that you realised that you don't thought that you want, because you
No,
refer to
that's
it to
not
him
true.
making the substitutions
Yeah.
about the centre back. So when is it that you saw Inter and thought they're not going to win this?
I think it was, I couldn't give you a specific moment, but I said it to my brother, I reckon somewhere about 15, 20 minutes into that second half, because Inter were only going backwards. They were only moving backwards. They'd becoming, and the thing is, they did create chances after that. I appreciate that. I said that they had chances afterwards, but the motion was all retreating into themselves. And I didn't believe they'd get away with it, because Atletico might not be a great team this season. They've got all sorts of flaws, but Antoine Griezmann's a great player, and they have other players in that attack that are going to get at you if you just invite them on. You have to play them on the front foot, because that's your football, and because they're too good to play on the back foot. And I think that retreat from Inzaghi was just the first time in such a long time that I felt like he let go of the initiative in a game. And I think that was...
Do you think he betrayed the identity that he has created? Do you think that in
I
some
think
way,
so.
and that's
Yeah.
why you would,
I think
that
he
was
lost
what
his
you...
nerve, and I think the whole team lost his nerve. And maybe it's not just him, right? I'm not trying to say it's just him, because I've already just said maybe Lautaro lost his nerve, maybe Marcus Thuram, who we've sung his praises all season, lost his nerve, and I sort of forgive him more because, you know what, he's not, out of all of them, the one who's been here and done it before. But he did lose his nerve on that shot. And my brother actually said to me again while we were watching, he said, do you think that's because it's all black and gold? And maybe it is, right? Maybe Thuram thinks that's all black. I can't just do a normal shot. I have to do a top of the net shot. You know, I have to do something special. But I think collectively they did. Sorry.
You see, Italians look at Jan Sommer and remember PTSD, and the fact that we didn't qualify to the World Cup because of how good Jan Sommer is on penalties.
Yeah.
Whereas listening to the commentary, which was really hard because I'm having to work on one radio show, but also listening to TV, which are saying things like, while I'm trying to watch the game, Oblak, who on earth can get past Oblak? And I'm thinking, oh gosh, who's the better goalkeeper, you know? And I'm sort of getting, I feel like we're being disrespected as like Italian representatives by them only talking about Oblak, and I'm trying to mention how good Jan Sommer is. But the only thing that kept creeping in my mind is I don't care how good any of the goalkeepers are. I don't trust Inter in taking the penalties. I don't trust any Serie A team that would have stepped up. This is not just an Inter thing. If it was Napoli who had to win on penalties, if it was Milan who had to win on penalties, if it was Juventus who had to win on penalties, all of them I would have been really scared of. Fiorentina, we have been so awful at penalties this season, you know, whether it's Fiorentina missing like 5, whether it's Patrick Kendrick's, you know, like statistic of 8 out of 22 penalties missed by Lautaro Martinez. It's Osimhen and the money
Yeah.
it just made me very nervous. I guess the existential question in all of this is that you, Nikki, in specific, were very upset by the fact that people were trashing the league because of this loss.
Mhm.
And you were saying, we haven't gone from a team that was, Calcio is back last year because we had 3
Yeah.
representatives in the quarterfinals and 2 in the semis, to now being a terrible league. And that this doesn't say all of the things that we want it to say about Inter, that this isn't a great league and
Yeah.
actually they're only there because we're rubbish.
I mean, I think I think it's funny because in my opinion, is not plucked from the air. I watch this team a lot. I think this Inter team is better than last year's Inter team, and last year they went to the final. So that just reminds you that there are things that happen in knockout football that aren't necessarily just what should happen, right? But I think that there's counterpoints you could make even to me saying that, which is that maybe this team has played better football this season, but actually maybe when push comes to shove in European competition, just being able to go, yeah, but Lautaro, Dzeko, Lukaku is a deeper roster than Lautaro, Thuram, and then Alexis Sanchez. Sanchez wasn't good after he came on. He put himself about, but he wasn't good. And in the first leg, Arnautovic did score the goal, but he also missed a bunch. Inter should have been out of sight in this tie. That's the thing which I think people forget in their sort of prisoner of the moment way. Is like, oh, they weren't brilliant away to Atletico. Where's this team that you've been telling us is capable of playing against Manchester City? Well, they played like that team in the first leg. They didn't in the second leg, and perhaps the reality of this team lies somewhere in between there, and perhaps there are ways in which this team wasn't ready to do it again. But I think that the reflection that, oh, they lost to an Atletico team that isn't that good, does not make me say, oh, I've been watching this team since September and I'm going to just pretend I didn't see any of that. I'm going to make my entire judgment on one night, because I think that's ridiculous.
Yeah, well, people love doing that. I mean, I did it about Arsenal.
Right, but this is like the thing. It's actually, this is the comparison I drew on Twitter, and then everyone sort of said, well, they are doing that anyway. Because I said, would Arsenal have suddenly been a much worse team if they lost that shootout to Porto than they were for winning it? Would it suddenly be because they went out of that round they were terrible? Whereas if they could now still win the competition, right? It's still possible for Arsenal to win the competition. They're in it, and that's the fine margins of a penalty shootout. Now, I think it's not a lottery. I think you can say Atletico took much better penalties than Inter. They deserved to win that shootout. But I think it's also, when you're talking about margins that fine, to sort of make these sweeping judgments sometimes can be a bit, for me, it's a bit much, but I also understand it. And I think it does, whether I say that or not, it does have a negative impact for Italian football, that this team that is going to run away with the league couldn't go to the quarterfinals. That's a bad look for Italian football for sure. And that's despite the fact that, because of the Europa League successes and Europa Conference successes, Italy are going to be one of the top 2 almost certainly now. I shouldn't tempt fate, but they really are in a very, very strong position in terms of getting that 5th Champions League spot.
Okay, I sort of do want to chime in because I have my own thoughts on all of this. But before, I actually don't
I've
remember
talked a
my
lot.
question
Sorry,
anymore.
Mina.
No, I was.
I've
Oh,
talked a
this
lot.
is my question. So, in the scheme of things, yeah, where do you still see Inter amongst Europe? Like, does this make you reassess their value, or do you think it's a bad day in the office?
I think it's a bad day. I really do. And
Okay,
maybe
so it's
I'm
just
wrong.
that.
Like,
Yeah.
I've been wrong before, but I just want to talk about this, and I will really shut up in a second. But like, the other teams in this quarterfinals, Mina, do I think they're worse than Borussia Dortmund, who didn't look better than Milan to me? No, because I didn't think Borussia Dortmund were better than Milan. They did finish ahead of them in the group, though. So again, what am I saying? Do I think that they are?
Do you think that maybe they had like an easy run in last year? These are just questions in comparison
Yeah,
to this
and
year,
they're
where they
fair
now had to face
questions.
bigger teams. You know.
And it's a fair question to say, are Inter being not pushed hard enough in Serie A, and they're
Mm-hmm.
used to playing worse teams, and now they
Mm-hmm.
play better teams, and it makes them look worse? It's totally fair. And look, Inter shouldn't have been playing Atletico, because they were the ones who didn't win their group, and they didn't win their group because they didn't beat Sociedad, who they should have beaten again both times, but they didn't, and because
Wait,
they
hold on.
blew it.
You think Inter could have beaten PSG if they had finished?
Well, I mean, it's a different draw. The draw doesn't necessarily go the same way, does it? But you say that, Mina, but I think this is actually, maybe this is the crux of it, being totally truthful. I'm here trying to make the argument about what Inter are. But is the crux of it not just there aren't that many of these European teams that you think are that convincingly good? Because PSG were terrible at times in the group stage. They were terrible in some of those games.
Which brings me nicely to my point, which is my point is, I guess, in all of this is that I think that this is actually the game that sort of opened my eyes a little bit to some of the way that I judge European football. I'm quite
Mm,
harsh in the way that I judge football in general, and
yeah.
I don't give excuses to teams. And I always feel like, the loser deserves to be a loser and the winner deserves to be a winner. But actually, something happened on this occasion in which I was like, I've never even thought about this, not even when my team Juventus were losing finals at the time. You see, Juventus, even when they would win a double, and it wasn't the Champions League as well, which wasn't a treble, there was just constant like, oh, Allegri's terrible, or the team is terrible, or whatever it is. But in fact, what it is that in this competition, it's not necessarily you playing really well. It is actually really necessary to have players that can manage and provide a moment of brilliance,
Yes.
because
Yeah.
that's the absolute difference maker between all these sides. At the end of the day, when you have the ability to bring on a Gareth Bale off the bench, or you have the ability to rely entirely on Mbappe to disguise the terribleness that
Mhm.
is your style of football, or the lack of the weaknesses in your midfield, like PSG have. If you look at, for example, the last team, the Italian team who played Atletico Madrid, it was Ronaldo. Otherwise, there would be no way that Juventus would have managed to hit Atletico Madrid.
Mm,
And I think on this occasion, what we saw was a really brilliant team, in the same way that we saw RB Leipzig be a really brilliant team against Real Madrid, a much better team, a better organized team that played a better style of
mm,
football. Except the difference is that Madrid have Vinicius Jr. They have players that can
yeah.
make a difference on the big level. And this goes down to the point where I've really started to realize that money is an issue,
Mm,
because you can create as much as you want to create. But if you don't have these star players, when everything is a bargain basement and you want to build from youth, Italy can't really afford to build on youth, because sometimes we need the oldies, which are Giroud and Dzeko, who make a difference,
mm,
unfortunately. And youngsters can't always do that unless you're lucky enough to have bought a youngster like Vinny Jr., right? So,
mm.
because that's what I've seen as being the difference maker. I used to genuinely believe whoever plays better wins better, but it,
This is the most horrible tweet I saw after that round of games was oh, I think it was Sporting Intel. I'm sorry if it wasn't, it was someone else. But they said, as expected, the richer team passed in all 8 ties. And that's the blunt truth. Even Atletico have a higher wage bill than Inter. That is the blunt truth. The higher wage bill won 8 ties out of 8. It's a miserable truth, but it is the truth.
yes, because we look at
And
the moment when you needed to score that goal, where
Mhm,
was Marcus Thuram? Even Barella,
mhm.
who is somebody who won the Euro, they don't have the necessary level of experience. I mean,
But this is where
Newcastle.
Lautaro for me is the one who's supposed to stand up. This is
This
where
is it.
Lautaro
He's
is
supposed to be
supposed
the
to be the one
world
that
class
stands
player,
up.
and this is where I
Yeah.
go back to the fact that, if anything, like, as I know, this is, even I was going back through the player ratings that Gazzetta had of last season and their journey in the world in the Champions League, and so many of them, Chanaloglu wasn't up to par to what Brozovic managed. I know this, like, because Chanaloglu has been brilliant, but sometimes the
Mhm,
difference between a brilliant performance is not consistency in the league, but it is being able to be clutch in the big moments.
mm.
And it is in these big moments that, unfortunately, Lautaro Martinez hasn't been able to hit the highs that we need to see. And I think that, listen,
And I
let's be
think
honest.
goal scorers as well, I mean, like specifically goal scorers, because you touched on with Mbappe. I mean, when I
Yeah,
think about
Ronaldo.
Paris Saint-Germain, like I just can't. It's the one that my brain goes back to is their home game against Newcastle, where they were losing until the 97th minute and they had not been good. But then Mbappe gets a penalty in the 97th and he scores it, and Newcastle are upset about it. But he scores and steps up. I feel like watching Bayern Munich, there's not that consistent brilliance to them, but there's Harry Kane, and
Yeah,
that resolves a lot for them. Watching Barcelona against Napoli, they really were so bad defensively at times. So were Napoli. So it was a ridiculously poor game, I thought, in terms of, again, Champions League giants in what you expect defensively. But they have Lewandowski up front, and he scored in both legs. These things make a difference.
yeah.
These things
That's
decide ties.
This is what it is. So this team can be so well done, and I don't. And I honestly, I'm one of those people which feels like Inzaghi was excessively, I think, I know that we're running too long on this
We're
conversation,
talking
guys,
long.
but
It's
I'm
my fault.
saying
I'm
that
talking too much.
I,
I'm
I
also
do.
calling everyone terrible, by the way, and I don't normally do this. I'm sorry to everyone who's like, "Oh, Nicky's just thinks everyone's terrible today," but
Oh,
that's
she also used a bad
me
word today,
joking.
but we'll talk about that a bit later. I was just going to say that I do feel like what people don't recognize as well is that this takes nothing away from Inzaghi. And I was actually really angry with
Yeah,
a lot of the criticism that he received because they were like, oh, you went back. And I'm not here to defend his mistake. Yes, he brought on a ton of centre backs. Yes, he made a mistake in getting too scared and going too deep. But again, I probably would have made the same mistake when I can look at my defense and think that they've kept 24 clean sheets in 38 games and that they have managed to um, concede only 13 goals, league goals. I can make that mistake. I can trust my defense. Whether or not he should have, of course, you should know better. Carlo Ancelotti makes at least one mistake at Champions League, a massive one. I'm be honest with you guys, Manchester City has built some of the most beautiful teams in Champions League football. They have lost to the likes of Monaco, to
yeah.
Liverpool, and
How many times did Pep lose his mind before he got it? Like, so
precisely.
many
I mean, he
times.
got thrashed 3 times in a row when
Yeah.
he was head of Bayern, and he actually had superstars, which is why I'm not entirely sure about him as being this great guy. I'm joking. This isn't about Pep, but I'm saying that Inzaghi, when Ancelotti makes a mistake, Vinny can bail him out. And unfortunately for Inzaghi, he didn't have a Lautaro to on this occasion who bailed him out, and
Mm.
Marcus Thuram and Barella who missed all the chances. If they had just gotten one of those counterattacks, it would have been over. So I don't think it's right to blame them. I think it's fair to say that sometimes these types of teams do need a veteran, just in the same way that I look at Milan and one of my biggest criticisms, I love Leao, but is he the guy I want to depend on? I love Lautaro.
Mhm.
Is he the guy I want to depend on? No, unfortunately, it's still Giroud when it comes to Milan, and it still would have been Dzeko if it had come to Inter. But unfortunately, a loss like that can be a big one, and I'm sure that they will look to do that. Apparently, they've now been linked to Ciro Immobile. So I don't
I
know if this is
I
actually
actually
true.
low key like that one if they can
Oh,
do it.
come on,
And no,
Nicky.
I do. No, I do. I do, and I'll tell you why. Two reasons. One of which is it's Inzaghi and Immobile, and Immobile has done all his best things for Inzaghi. That's just a
That's
fact.
true.
The other thing is, Ciro Immobile, you can criticize him plenty, and you should, for his international record. His European record while playing for Italian clubs is good. He actually has a good goals to games record playing for Italian clubs in Europe. And the final thought here is just Marco Arnautovic or Ciro Immobile. It's not a question to me when you're bringing one of those two off the bench. I'd rather see Immobile coming on.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, I can't think of any. I'm just wondering if Lewandowski is looking to leave anytime soon. Um, okay, but either way, they drew 1-1 to Napoli, which sets us up for another exciting title race. Could Milan do it?
I mean, I suppose this sort of to bring the two things together. It was interesting to see the Curva Nord were like waiting outside San Siro with a banner saying "Fieri di voi," proud of you. Like there were fireworks set off. There was this real sort of like I think deliberate decision by the Inter fans, or at least the ultras, to say yes. Obviously disappointing result, but we're still going to win the league. We're still getting that Seconda Stella before Milan are. Let's make them feel good about themselves when they come back.
Oh, Nicky, I have a friend of mine who works well, no, he doesn't work at Milan anymore, but you know, I think which one I'm talking about. But he sent me a
Mm-hmm.
message with the particular banner saying, "This is the difference between Inter and Milan."
Milan, who were, of course, last season, were calling the players over and killing them after the
But isn't that
yeah.
interesting? I mean, it's like, what do you prefer? Like, as in, to all my Premier League friends, they love that, right? They love like the banner that says "We're proud of you." They love, these
Mhm.
supportive fans, and then people like Milan fans or Madrid fans who like are so used to hating on their teams unless they win everything. Then is that a way of sort of signifying that we're okay with? I don't know. Is it a failed season? If
No,
they're going to just win a title, right?
we had this conversation last time, and I know that Patrick and you both disagreed with me, but like I think you can say it is really disappointing the amount in the last 16. I think that's completely fair to say. I think Inter should, without question, have had the quarterfinals as their minimum target this season because they are good enough to be in that last part. And I remember years ago talking to Gigi Buffon back when Juventus was still on top of the world, and he said with the Champions League, it's an knockout competition, and you can't say, oh yes, we're going to win it this season, but quarterfinals, you get to the quarterfinals, and then you see what happens. And I think that's exactly where the bar should have been set for Inter. Is you have to at least get to the last 8 and then you see what happens. And they didn't do that. So that's a failure. But if you get the second star, you win the league, and you do it with potentially a lot of points. I don't think you can call that a failed season for them. I think that's still a
Isn't
meaningful
that
success.
isn't that what we're worried about in Italy? Is that there isn't any level of competition? That this is a poor league, and this is potentially why they're able to open such a huge gap. Whereas, like,
Yeah,
if we're trying to create magnificent teams, then they need to be facing actual challenges. And I'm not entirely sure anymore that Inter are. I mean, their closest challengers, Juventus, have completely collapsed. We are going to talk about them next because they have just become a hideous mess. Milan have been so topsy-turvy. And you know what? I don't expect more of Milan. They have 10-year rivals. They're allowed to have a year of transition, and they're amazing to be at 62 points already. But I think there is a legitimate question, and I'm somebody who hates this question, but there is a legitimate question about, we are so good at building teams, but are we good at building teams that can actually win competitions anymore? Or is money have become a huge problem now? We just don't have the
yeah.
money to buy the level of players that can change these things.
Money is a huge problem, but they were in the final last year. That's the thing that I have to keep coming back to. They were in the final last year. I don't know. I think that in
But so
terms
did
of Sarri's
Juventus, and none
approach
of
to
them won
goals,
it.
yeah,
Because again, the
yeah, that's
difference
true.
is that you're up against De Bruyne and you've got Mkhitaryan. There's a difference,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, that's true. And the last Italian team to win it
And
was
Juventus
this
had Lamina
extraordinary
when they
phenomenon.
had like Kroos and Modric, and it's like these teams will keep reaching the finals, but how many of them will win it against? At the end of the day, the teams with the better players always win. Even when Liverpool, which is a magnificent team, is up against Real Madrid, they lose. It's the
Yeah.
team with the most better individuals tends to win these competitions, and this is what worries me about Italian football.
It's really hard. It's really hard to defy the money. It's really hard to break that pattern. And I think the worry for all of European football, frankly, is are we entering into that era with even where even Real Madrid are going to struggle to keep up with Manchester City spending? That's a question for all of Europe. I'm slightly wary that producer
The
Simon might kill
timing.
us if we keep talking forever on this topic.
We should move
But
on to
yeah, just to
Allegri
say
and
quickly on
Juventus.
the game of Inter Napoli, it wasn't much of a story. This should have been a great game for the champions elect against the previous champions who also ran away with it last season. It was a 1-1 draw. Inter, I thought, was slightly the better team. They gave away a cheap goal to Juan Jesus at the end, and to me, it just looked like a game between two teams that are knackered from their Europe.
I'm
I
slightly
don't think
depressed.
knackered. I think emotionally drained from having gone out of the Champions League. I think honestly, but if people are wondering why we didn't talk more about that game, it's because it wasn't that meaningful, I suppose.
No.
After the Champions League, it just felt like it was both teams coming home and crashing a bit back into
But it
their
is a
home
bit
environment.
disappointing for Napoli, who are seventh on 45 points,
Yeah.
because they could have really reused the points. Another team that could really use some points is Juventus, who drew to Genoa 0-0.
Mhm.
It was one of those matches that makes you want to rip your hair out. I think at this point, nearly all the fans have turned against Allegri, and this is the first time in my life I think I've heard Nicky say that. After hearing, okay, Nikki, I'm going to leave it to you, but I mean, Allegri had a very touchy and aggravated almost interview with
Yeah.
Sky, and he seemed a lot of people were very disturbed by his behavior. Nikki,
Yeah, I mean, he
tell him what
was
they called him.
who called him? I
Nothing.
used a word that I'm not going to repeat. I thought he behaved in a really uh, I can't think of a
Childish.
polite way of describing his behaviour. Unbecoming way in
You're
his
so
interview
polite.
with Gianfranco Teodino on Sky. Teodino was asking him what are ultimately fairly reasonable questions to ask. You've only picked up, 7 points from the last 8 games, Juventus. It's been a pretty incredible collapse from having been right on Inter's heels to drawing with Empoli, losing to Udinese, drawing with Verona, losing to Napoli, drawing with Atalanta, drawing with Genoa now, the only win in that whole run against Frosinone. And Allegri, rather than addressing the question, just came back at him with this series of snide remarks. Oh, do you know how to be a manager? Well, I don't know how to be a journalist. So, basically, how dare you ask me about what a manager does because you're a journalist. You don't know what a manager does. And then you're saying, oh, well, yes, we're trying to work. Certainly, I make some mistakes. But he'd been asked about how do you go from doing well to just 7 points in 8 games. And he goes, well, I could say the same for your question. If you give me a more intelligent question, I will reply. And even then, Teotino, who's in the studio, sort of tries to be like laughing it off and lighthearted about it, going, oh, no, I don't have any more intelligent questions. That's the limit of my intelligence. And still Allegri sort of comes after him and gives it, well, then I'm sorry, I'm a manager who works for Juventus, and when the host comes in saying, oh, we're just trying to understand, he cuts her off and says, you don't need to try to understand, you need to ask questions, different questions. What do you understand? I'm the one who coaches the team. It was really like childish from Allegri in terms of like not engaging in an adult way with the questions. If you didn't want to answer them, there was a way to say that wasn't attacking a journalist's professionalism, I think.
I think what's really interesting is that I had watched Conte on the sidelines, and he always used to he yelled at Capello. Do you remember, who criticized him at the time? And I just remember I thought Allegri coming on, I was very against the idea of Allegri coming to Juventus, but when he came, I thought that he was a little bit like Daniele De Rossi after Jose Mourinho. It was like a breath of fresh air. He never complained about the referees. He was always cheerful, to use a pun of his name, in the sidelines. But it's interesting to see how he is now losing his mind a little bit, and how, being actually questioned at a club that isn't doing well. And how it's starting to throw his behavior from one that was once upon a time who deflected and was a man of the people. And when he came into Sky last 2 years ago, when he wasn't working at Juventus, everyone was like, oh wow, we've got the professor bag, the great Allegri. Do you remember when he was sort of adored? And now you're seeing this Juventus team sort of collapse. Obviously the fans feel like this is all entirely his fault. I am somebody who still refuses to agree to that. But I will definitely.
What did you think about this interview? I mean, I don't know. Am I being unfair?
It's a shame. It's a shame that he is starting to behave like that, to be honest with you. I would have expected better from him, because this is not like him. And it seems like it has and then when they asked him about, I mean, I read one thing in which, because I read the transcript rather than watch anything, one thing he did say was also, when they asked about the fact that you went into retreat, you should be sort of expecting better. And he goes, I'm not going to, I mean, it's one day. It's not like we're all of a sudden going to be in this, which sort of made me laugh, because it's true. It is one day. But at the end of the day, you're supposed to be the person that absorbs. And the fact of the matter is that when you're having players being sent off, when the team looks so scared and so, I don't believe he's lost the dressing room, but I do believe he needs to calm them down. There's something going on there, and he needs to take responsibility for that.
And I think that's almost the bigger takeaway from that interview, because in the end, what I will say, having criticized him, I think all of us have bad days at the office. All of us lose our temper, and I'm certain that when you're having a bad time at work, having people stick the cameras in your face and ask questions about why you're doing such a bad job is not fun often. And I think that in the end, I've said my sort of critical piece of it. It doesn't make me, in the same way as Inter losing to Atletico doesn't make me throw away everything I know about Inter, that doesn't make me change everything I've thought about Allegri in one instant. But I do think it suggests to me that he's not got a grip on the situation. So I think if he has a grip on the situation, he doesn't snap like that. And I think or at least he feels like he hasn't got a grip on the situation, because I think if he feels in a more confident place, he won't respond like that.
Yeah, this is what I'm saying. He definitely doesn't feel that supported anymore.
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't be one of the reasons why he was always happy before at Juventus was that, while they were doing well, and he always had Paratici and Marotta on his side. All of a sudden, he's asked again about his future relentlessly. The fans have turned against him, other than the ultras. He's been hearing that for a long time. And for somebody who's always talking about results, Patrick said last week, not having that anymore, not having the results and the bad play in general is proving to be a problem. So he's obviously not feeling safe in his job at the moment. Elkan coming last week to me was a big sign of support, but it's obviously not enough if this is the way that he's behaving. So I think if anything, this should tell you about what's going to happen in the summer if this is the way that he's behaving right now. But do you think there's any fear of them dropping out of the top four?
What's the gap now? The gap is now 8 points to Roma in 5th place. Roma are certainly winning a lot of games, so I think it's no longer unthinkable. Of course, need to remind everyone that 5th may well be good enough for a Champions League spot still. But Atalanta are 4 points behind Roma, and they have a game in hand. So it's not inconceivable. In 10 games, it shouldn't happen, because, 8 points in 10 games, it really shouldn't happen. But the results are are so bad that at some point it has to change or you are in trouble. And the next games are not particularly forgiving. It's Lazio
No.
away in the league, Lazio at home in the cup, and then Fiorentina at home. And of course, Fiorentina always come heated to play Juventus. And then it's Torino away, which of course is a derby that has been very, very one-sided for almost all of its editions for many years, but it's still a derby. So they certainly do need to respond at some point
Then there's
soon.
also there's Roma away, there's Bologna
Oh,
away.
there's still Milan, Roma away, and
Yeah.
Bologna away on the schedule. Yeah, so
I mean, there's they should be able to gather some points, but they need to start building momentum right now. And if Vlahovic is out, they don't have Milik. It's going to be really tough for them going forward because
yeah,
that front
Vlahovic
line
just
just
back from suspension and then got a red card as well, like you said.
yes. So he acted very petulantly because he got a yellow card for talking too much and then continued to talk. So it goes to show you the level of frustration that exists right now in the dressing room. So that is where Juventus find themselves right now on 59 points. Moving on, Atalanta against Fiorentina was postponed. Director Joe Barone got taken away and he's in hospital. Fiorentina actually did provide an update and said that his situation is critical but stable because of the fact that what we understand is that Fiorentina immediately as a club requested that the game be delayed. A lot of the players have rushed to the hospital to be with their director. I think that we're not here to debate whether or not it's. I'll be honest with you guys. When I first heard the situation, I didn't think that would immediately result in the delay of the
Mm.
or a postponement of the game. Um, Nicky, it's not something that we.
It's a very unusual situation. I was saying I can't remember a time when a football game was postponed because of an illness of a sporting director, and he's the general director is his official title, Joe Barone, but he is very much the sort of hands-on presence of ownership. He's the one who's there making things happen a lot of the time. So he is a very present figure there. But I don't have any memory of that of a game being postponed because of the illness of a director before, which I think my takeaway from that is it's obviously something very serious. The club, as you said, Mina, have since come out and said something about it. By the time people listen to this, there may be more news. But yeah, best all our sort of thoughts and well wishes with Joe and his family, and I hope he comes through it and is in great shape on the other side sooner and as soon as can be, I guess.
Yeah, which it's absolutely a horrible thing to happen,
Mm,
especially after the anniversary of Davide Story's passing. So
mm,
it's a tender time for Fiorentina. I was actually really looking forward to seeing how they would play against Atalanta, but
yeah.
that will be a match that will be played at a later time. Lazio under Martuscello, who are still awaiting Igor Tudor to come and take over, but they managed to finally grab a win after 4 losses in a row in all competition with Maurizio Sarri leaving. They managed to grab a win against Frosinone. It was interesting about how the team actually celebrated with the caretaking coach. Caretaker? Would you call it
Caretaker.
interim? Yes,
Caretaker's right.
just caretaker. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Sorry, in my head there's never mind. I always link that word to something bad, so I try not to use it. But anyway, um, and anyway, and he explained, the caretaker, that Maurizio Sarri had left because we had spoken about this actually last week on the pod, had left it to try to send a jolt to the team, which I thought was interesting. I don't know if that jolt is going to remain or what Lazio is going to do going forward, but a good win, a much needed win. What about Milan? They managed to get into second place. Are you impressed with that performance against Verona? Leao, come on, Nicky, don't you have something to say about the fact that he just misses so many, so many great chances for goals sometimes?
Yeah, it was. I mean, this was one of those games that they complicated for themselves. They were 2-0 up Milan and then let Verona back into the game with a goal from Noslin. But they were they were good value for the win without being overwhelmingly impressive. I do think watching both Milan and Roma this weekend, both of them had that hint of the Thursday nights about them, where you just think this team is playing those Thursday night games, coming back and showing the legginess of it. I think that was a factor. But look, Samuel Chukwueze getting his first Serie A goal off the bench. They have had lots of productivity off the bench this season. Milan, and that's one of their successes, is building that deeper set of options going forward. A win is a win for Milan. They're not going to catch Inter at the top of the table unless something extraordinary happens in these last 9 games, but they are certainly looking the most confident after Inter in terms of heading towards that guaranteed Champions League spot.
I thought Chukwueze talked about things really nicely in his post-match interview, in which he talked about like he completely understands that Pulisic is the man. It's so interesting because when they both arrived to the club, I really thought that he would be the guy. I mean, there was so much money spent on him. I thought he was going to be the guy that we watched, and I'm really happy for him that he got his goal today. But Pulisic has really been really astonishingly good, you know.
Yeah, I mean, just to say as well, because we haven't mentioned it on here, I mean, since we last showed up, Milan Roma in the Europa League. I mean, that'll be a fun quarterfinal, guaranteed a Europa League semi-finalist, at least from Italy. So, looking forward to that tie.
I was really upset by that because I thought
it's going to be.
Yeah, but did you not feel like we got denied to? I feel like we got denied because I just thought that both Roma would win whoever they were going to face, unless it was Liverpool, and I thought that Milan would win whoever they were going to face too. To be honest with you, I was really hopeful of having them in the semis.
It's definitely pairing together two teams that could have gone further if they hadn't. But it's also a guaranteed semi-finalist against most likely Leverkusen, so could be a fun semi-final.
Yeah, absolutely will. Leverkusen had a great game against Karabag. Anyway, moving
they
on.
really managed to make a meal of that, didn't they? I mean, that's a whole different topic.
What a topic it is. Pellegrini, wow, this player is just on form. With Roma managed to get a 1-0 victory over Sassuolo, that Roma train continues to move forward under Daniele De Rossi. Pellegrini's got what now? How many goals? 6 goals and 3 assists in 13 matches under De Rossi. It's just incredible, the turnaround in his performance. And I thought it was really interesting when he talked about the fact that he just feels like he can follow his thoughts and allow creativity and allow to chase spaces, that this is perfect for him. And it just got me thinking about the kinds of coaches that you have. You have the ones like Gasperini, which are set on a style of system and they tell you how to move. It's just clearly instructions, a little bit like Antonio Conte. And then you have the coaches who try to leave it up to the player to find themselves within a scheme, which is obviously where Daniele De Rossi fits in, and it seems to be working magnificently for those players who do have a more advanced footballing IQ or have played for a little bit longer, like Pellegrini has, who has experience to do that. I wanted to go into a whole discussion about this. But we don't have the time to go into all of this.
We've run way longer than we went to tonight already, haven't we? We was like, it's a quick one tonight because everyone's on schedules. We're recording on Sunday night. We normally record on Monday. So, but I'm certain we'll have more chances to talk about Pellegrini. It was another important win for Roma. I think they definitely, by the end of this game, looked out on their feet, but getting the 3 points was what mattered.
Absolutely. And they're getting closer and closer to trying to get a top 4 place. Obviously, like we said, top 5 might just be enough. In other news, Lecce get to winning ways under new coach Gotti, a 1-0 with Kristovic coming through for them. He was brilliant at the start of the season, so it's nice to see him back on the score sheet in their 1-0 victory over Salernitana, who are now thinking of bringing back Pippo Inzaghi because Fabio Liverani is not working out for them. Other than that, I think we've pretty much covered anything other than Monza winning 1-0 against Cagliari. Guess what? It was a Maldini scoring under Ranieri. And if we look back at the goals, Paolo Maldini had also scored against Ranieri and against Cagliari. So it's a nice story to tell for the Maldini father and son duo. Torino won 2-0 against Udinese. I don't know what's going on with Udinese, but they are just an awful team this season. And that's pretty much it, Nicky.
That is. Thank you so much, everyone, for helping us get to 1,000 YouTube subscribers. We got there about a day or something. Maybe it was just a few hours before Patrick. So I enjoyed that we managed to turn that race into a race and pip them to the post. Thank you so much for supporting us. Obviously, this week coming up, we have the international break. Italy have friendlies against against Venezuela and Ecuador. Folorunsho in the squad is the call-up that I think a lot of us are most excited about. Curious to see how he is going to do there. Obviously, he scored an outrageous goal against Juventus, but he's been playing well recently and deserves his chance. So we'll definitely have some sort of update during the international week. We're not exactly sure what yet. All of us obviously have been saying obviously a lot. I'm sorry, guys, it's late. But we've all been having a very busy run recently. So all of us are trying to take at least a little bit of downtime in the international window where we can grab it as well. But we will definitely be along with some sort of update, extra podcast in the week, and then we will be back to round up those Italy games and to prepare you for the last segment, the final 9 rounds of the Serie A season after that. But for now, that's it from Mina and I, and we'll see you really soon.
Serie A Chronicles is a Mina Chronicles production.